Hello again, Dr. Tony Scuderi here. We're going to continue our lessons in developmental psychology, uh, an introduction to it. I'm not going to go into extreme detail, as you well know. We've covered a lot so far. We have two presentations. I hope you had a chance to look at part one and part two. The last one we left on was Lorenz and his attachment theory and how attachment theory worked with him and his ducks and how attachment theory works with children and how attachment theory really works with all of us. We do become attached to people, and as we become attached to people, we want to try to emulate them, if you will, or make them as happy as we possibly can, so as to make us happy as well. So I'd like to move on from there. Again, review all of this stuff, and if you do have any questions, please feel free. ANTHONY .SCUD as in David, ERI at InterCoast, INTERCOAST.edu with any questions, and I will be more than happy to send you answers. So let's go back to sharing the screen and let's move on to the next part of it, which is the cognitive theories. And we now have a different way of showing you how children learn. The first of these is one of the foremost theorists, Jean Piaget, or Jean Piaget, depending on your pronunciation. Piaget uh, believed that children build or construct or have a construct of life and their understandings of the world. And the way that these constructs are created is that the children interact with things around them. All right. And they learn by these interactions. They are active participants and not passive participants. They just don't watch and say, I like this. Okay, let me try it. But they actively participate. We see this in grade school and in children that when they're in the primary schools, kindergarten, preschool, all that, the teachers try to get them to learn to work with each other. And when a child is struggling, another child will come along and help that child. That's part of Piaget's thinking, but there's also another theorist down the road that we'll talk about that talks more in detail about this. And we'll mention him later. Let me mention him now. His name is Lev Vygotsky, and he talks about this in detail. But right now, let's talk about Piaget. So Piaget went and studied his children, his three children, and he focused not on what they knew. So he wasn't interested in what kids know, but he was more interested in how they knew. How did they know these things? How do they retain this information? How do you retain your information? How do I retain my information? Where does that come from? Is it selective? Is it not selective? What do we do with the information that we have to learn that's not necessarily selective but necessary? What do we do with this? So two of the main principles that Piaget came up with, one was assimilation and the other one was accommodation. So when children assimilate, they take things from the outside and they make it a part of themselves. That is assimilation. They assimilate it or bring it into into their unconscious, and it becomes a part of them. So a child is doing something and they're learning how to do something, and they repeat the process over and over and over and over and over until all of a sudden it becomes a part of them and a part of who they are and a part of their behavior. So they've taken this X out here and they brought it into themselves and they made it a part of themselves, and their behavior unconsciously works out of that assimilated behavior, right? So it becomes a part of that. Now, let's say that a child is doing something and oh, they know they have to do it, but they really don't want to do it. They don't want to be bothered doing it, but everybody has to do something, right? So in order to make their caretakers happy or whoever they're dealing with happy, their teachers, whatever it may be, they perform the behavior. So they make themselves available, if you will, to do the behavior. We call this accommodation. So they accommodate the other individual, or they make they allow the behaviors to be accepted by the other individuals based on what the other individual's needs are. So when we talk about assimilation, we take something from the outside, or Piaget would take something from the outside and bring it into, and they would now make that a part of them. And then accommodation came in where if they really don't do whatever it is, but it makes the other person happy, they will do it to make the other person happy. We do this all the time as adults. We've learned this. We've learned how to do this, and the way that it's shaped for an infancy is I told you, the parent will come and say, I told you to do this. Now, why don't you do it? I don't care if you like to do it or not. Do it. So the child wants and does it. They fit, but they'll do it. So they accommodate the adult's wishes. All right. We do that. We're at work. We do things, and all of a sudden we sit there and say, man, I don't really want to do what the boss tells me to do. That's stupid. This is just the dumbest thing in the world. Blah 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 blah. But we do it anyway. Why? Because if we don't, we're going to be on the outside looking in. So what do? We accommodate the boss's wishes. So we learn how to make people happy through accommodation. We make ourselves happy through assimilation. So these are two of the main things that Piaget came up with. He also had different stages of development, and these are his stages. So the first stage of Piaget's development, which he saw children starting from birth to age, he called the sensory motor phase. Sensory motor. So in the sensory motor phase from birth to age 2, the infant uses their five senses: seeing, touching, smelling, tasting, feeling. Said that already. Seeing, tasting, touching, hearing. Hearing was the last one, right? So they use their five senses and their motor abilities, how they move around to understand the world. So we see a little infant in a crib. Again, we believe, those of us that haven't studied, that have kids, right, believe that, oh, isn't he or she cute? But they're not going to remember what they do. Well, hold on there. Even when the brain is developing, infants may not remember when they're adults what they did and the best, what they did. However, their behaviors down the road is part and parcel of the way they did things, make it a part of them. So how they accommodated the world around them and then took the way they made their life around them happy, put that in an unconscious way or in a conscious way as an infant into themselves. They assimilated what they accommodated into themselves. And now we have our behaviors based on that. So we see an infant laying in a crib with one of these little moogles around them, right? Black and white things that go around in circles. Maybe they're pictures or they're little animals or something like that to go around at it and looks at it, and try to reach it and play with it and laughs and gurgles and all this stuff, right? And the infant, isn't crying at that time, and eventually they get tired and they fall asleep, hopefully, right? So the little mogul that they have above their cradle, that's what they're looking at an assimilation. It's part of their world. And through their body actions, they're trying to reach out and touch it. And even though they don't know that they're trying to play with it, they're curious to see what that is. Of course, but what's happening is their world around them is being calm, collective, all this stuff. So they're accommodating, they're assimilating that behavior themselves that's being accommodated. And they're trying to understand what's going on around them. What is this? What happens with this? Um, and that's just a little thing around their crib. Eventually, as the kid turns two, we see different stages of the child crawling around, exploring their world, right? Mom takes him out of the cradle, or dad takes him out of the cradle, puts him on the floor, and the kid just crawling around, or eventually turns over and starts to, crawl around. The first, oh my gosh, she's crawling, or she's crawling, or something. Um, Cries because they're afraid until somebody picks them up, and then the crying stops. All this behavior happening, and then they're just looking around, and they see again this little creature here, and touching it, playing with it, putting it in their mouth, and all this. Oh, this tastes good. This doesn't taste good. And if I squeeze it, oh my gosh, look what it does, right? And that's what winds up happening. They sit there, and go, oh look, and now they're going to play with the little squeaky, fuzzy thing that they have no idea it's a little ducky, right? So that's what they do with it, and they explore their world, and they try to understand what's going on. Uh, it's a little fuzzy creature. It's warm. So if I cuddle up next to it, oh, it makes me feel warm, and it's nice and cozy, and I can snuggle up to it and fall asleep. Even though that's the process that we know, the little infant may not know that process, but they know that there is a contact comfort. Okay, if I touch it, gives me a little. That's birth to age 2, and this behavior gets reinforced. So all of a sudden they start to walk, and as they walk, they go around, and of course, once a kid starts walking around, all bets are off. You might as well start getting little tennis balls and cutting them in half and putting them on sharp objects, and making sure that your cabinets are closed, because we're going to start to experiment and open up the doors. Oh, this thing opens up, and look what's inside there, right? And then by age 2, they're going to start talking, and this is the period of time where they continue to explore their environment. And now they're starting to think a little bit more, trying to put the concepts that they see on the outside together, and they start the incessant questioning. You this is called the pencil. Why? Because you're right with it. Why? Because you want to put your name down. Why? You get all those things forever. Um, and then they start to make the connections. The next thing you know is they take a writing instrument and in your head for 2 seconds, and the kid's writing on the wall. And it's like, what are you doing? Right? It doesn't make those connections, but tries to assimilate what's going on. And that goes from birth to age 2. The next is from age 2 to age 7. Now, during this time, what the child has a tendency to do is the child uses mental representations of objects and is able to use symbolic thought and languages. So the child, remember I said, here's the duck, right? And the child can see the duck and knows that the duck exists, but then all of a sudden they take the duck and pull it away. And eventually the child comes to an understanding that the duck is behind the chair and not necessarily here. Okay. So we have that situation occurring. So from age 2 to 7, the child uses the mental representation to sit here and say, wait a minute, this duck is here, it's real. I know it's real because, mommy or daddy or whoever was holding this duck, and they took the duck and they put it away, they hid it. But I know that duck is still there. It's still a real duck, right? So they'll represent it, and then all of a sudden, this is why, when you have a little kid, you go like this, and you say, "This is a ducky. You want your ducky? It's a ducky," right? Eventually, the kid will sit there and say "ducky" and make the connection. So whenever they see something that looks like this, they're going to sit there and say "ducky," right? Give me 1 second. Yeah. What's this? To the little kid. Little kid says, ducky. What's this? And little kid says, ducky. So the connection isn't there. They know that it's a real object, but it looks the same thing to them. They can't make the distinction. They can't sit there and say, ducky, piggy. So ducky, ducky. So they'll do that, right, during the pre-operational stage until they learn to differentiate. So they'll make a mental representation of anything that looks furry, anything that looks furry is the same thing. So their mind represents it as the same thing. So if I were to get I don't know, a dog, a stuffed dog, or my little things up here, right? Well, here's a Grogu, from Star Wars. And if I say, and what's this? Ducky, right? Well, eventually, afterwards, they'll sit there and say, oh, Ducky, Piggy, Grogu, Gorilla. We'll make that distinction eventually. When that comes, this is called concrete operations. It usually starts between age 7 and 11. During this stage of development, Piaget believed that they start to use logical operations or principles to start solving problems. This has this shape and this color and these type of feet. This is called a ducky. This has this shape, this color, but it has like two arms and two legs. It doesn't have any wings or anything. And so I guess this something that looks like this, a piggy, right? So they'll start to logically sit there and differentiate, show the differences between these different objects outside of themselves. Also, the time where logical reasoning, according to this Piaget, starts to happen. So now we have little children sitting there and learning in first grade, second grade, third grade how to do things. Right? Here's one pen. Here's another pen. If I bring these two together, how many do I have? 1 plus 1 equals, 2. Very good. Now, if I have two pens here and I have two and I take one away, how many do I have left? 1. Very good. And if I add 1, 2, but that's not a pen. You're right, but it's still an object, right? And it's still a writing object. This is where object permanence comes in. Anything that writes, right? The child learns if it writes, it's an object of writing. Now I have to differentiate between a pencil and a pen, right? Have the object permanence. Now you need to make the differentiation of the objects. So that's what happens here during pre-operational concrete operational stages. So now you make the differentiation. So now from age 7 to 11, they learn that, okay, these objects are the same. They're called pens. This one, even though it's different, if I take this one and put it here, so I'm the teacher, and I want to say, so I have 2 pens plus 1 pencil. How many objects do I have? Count them for me, and the child will go 1, 2, 3. Oh, you have 3 objects. Very good. Now, if I have 1 pencil and 1 pen and I take them away or I subtract them, how many do I have left? And the child sits there and goes, well, wait a minute, you had 3, you took 2 away, so that must be, let's see, 3, 2, 1. You have 1 left. Very good. So now you teach the child how to learn. and how to do very simple mathematics. So we see this happening during the concrete operational stages. The cognitive processes and the logical processes are starting to come into play, and the child is starting to learn how to use logic appropriately, how to make decisions. You know, I like this guy. I don't like this guy. They start to look around at the ones that don't think, the opposite or the same sex or whatever, yucky. Oh, this person is different from me, or this person is the same as me. I really like this person almost as much as I like mommy. They may not understand that they're getting attracted to that individual, but they understand during these ages that they have this um, sense of sense of something with. So the child uses logic to look around the world, explore the world, understand the world, ask questions. I don't know what this is. What is this? Well, we know this little thing as a computer mouse or as a mouse. Now, a little kid will come up. Well, today the kids know, right? But when I was growing up, I had no idea what the heck this was. I would see something like this and I'd say, oh, it's a piece of plastic with a ball on top of it. We didn't have computers back then. All right, I'm an old man. Stop it. Okay, so we see this, right? So I'll sit there and I'll say, this is called a mouse. And then I'll pick up a little thing and hold it. Whoops, excuse me. And I'll hold it. And I'll sit there and I'll say, this is a mouse. And the kid will sit there and say, well, wait a minute. You just called that piece of plastic thing a mouse, and now you're calling this a mouse. 4 legs and rolls around and is fuzzy, it's got a tail, and oh, well, what's the difference? Ah, so during this stage, the concrete operational stage, the child begins to learn the difference between a live mouse and a plastic mouse, right? So the complexities of the world start to become less complex, start to solve problems. When they go to the store and sit there and say, I'd like a mouse, when they walk into a computer store, they're not going to get this fuzzy thing with the tail. They're going to know that they're going to get one of these things. And sometimes they have a little cord on the end, and then they'll make the connection. Oh, now I get it. This is a mouse with a little cord on it, like this mouse has a tail, right? And then they'll sit there and say, oh, this mouse doesn't have a cord on it. Oh, so this mouse here must have his tail chopped off, whatever it may be. So that's concrete operations. And then as a child starts to grow past age 11, when they pretty much are learning these things, then the connection comes in and like, I know everything now. And now they're age 12. This is called formal operations. This goes till they die. So according to Piaget, formal operations is when they start to, after they've learned the logic and after they've learned how to manipulate all the material within the logical combinations and permutations in a systematic fashion, then they can now make abstractions from it. But they have to learn the basics. I'll give you a perfect example of how this doesn't work. Okay. I'm terrible at mathematics. I will be the first one to say it. All right. I'm going to take something here and I'm going to show you something. Let me get my pen so you can see this. All right. I'm going to write something down on this piece of paper and I hope you can see it. Okay. All right. You see that? 2x plus 3xy plus 2y. All right. Algebra. How do you solve this? Right. So one of the things that still doesn't click with me when people tell me how to do this is they say, give me a number. So I'll sit there and I'll say, okay, 3. Give me another number. Okay, 5. So now they're going to say, for every x that you see, put the number 3 in there. And for every y you see, put the number 5 in there. So now the equation looks like this, right? Remember, it looked like that above. So for every 2, I put a 3. For every, for every x, I put a 3. For every y, I put a 5. So now the equation looks like that. Well, okay, that makes sense because somebody told me to do that. And that's fine. I can easily work that problem at this point because I know the basics: add, subtract, multiply, and divide. But what happens if all of a sudden you have an abstraction? Somebody sits there and says, "What I want you to do is take that building over there. I want you to take this over here and figure this out from it." And you're sitting over there going, "How do I do that?" Well, simple mathematics: 2x plus 3y equals this, and go ahead and do that. And I'm like, "Well, what's x? What's y?" Well, that's for you to figure out. Well, how do I figure it out? Right? And that's where algebra comes in. And I never really learned how to figure out X and Y and all this stuff. And then you find out when you get to geometry and you have to sit there and you have something, in geometry that looks like this, right? And they're telling you got two sides over here, side 1, side 2, and side 3 as a triangle. You know the number, you know that from here to here is, let's say, 10 inches, and this over here is 15 inches. All right. So how long is side 3? Right. Now, for some of you out there, you can easily sit there and say, "Oh, come on, Doc, that's simple." I'm sorry. I may have 3 doctorates, but I don't know how to figure that out. Uh, that's just the way it is. Okay. Um, There's something that happened during my formal operational stages when I was learning algebra and geometry that those things just don't connect in my head. However, somewhere along the line, and this is where we see what we call a cognitive differential, I call it a cognitive differential, is if all of a sudden, and again, later on in formal operations, we'll see something like this. Now we see a monster equation, if I can get it up there, that looks like this. I'm going to figure out if I can. There you go. It looks like this. And you sit there and say, "Oh my God, that looks even worse than algebra." Well, the crazy thing about it, this for me is very simple. I can figure this out. I know what this is. So, how does that work? That's statistics. So, if I didn't learn the algebra, how do I learn the statistics? How do I learn that? Because that's easy to figure out for me. Well, somewhere in the concrete operational stage, connections were made, and then connections were almost made. And then down the road, through a lot of hard work, it came to the point where I could sit there and the connections are now formally brought together, and I could sit there and say, ah, 2x plus 3y minus 3x doesn't make sense to me to figure that out. But this parametric equation makes plenty of sense to me when I'm comparing 2 different objects. And this is why. Now, that has a lot to do with who taught who what. I had a wonderful professor in college, my undergraduate work that taught. I'm not very good at statistics. Trust me. There are certain things in statistics that I'm very good at, and I know exactly how to work it. Okay. Why? Because his professor broke it down in very simple terms. So he took me at 20 something years old and brought me back to age 7 to 11 in my concrete operational stage. He saw that my cognitive processes were not of a 20-year-old, but of a 7 or an 11-year-old learning mathematics. Painstakingly went through the process and formulated a way for me to understand, to conceptualize the very complex, making it very simple, right? This is what needs to happen during sensory motor, pre-operational, especially the concrete operational stage. But when you reach the formal operational stage between age 12 and up, you start to make those connections. You start to use logic. You start to say, ah, now this makes sense. Now I know that X in the parametric equation, right? The X is this line of numbers. The Y is this line of numbers that I have from real data, real material. They could be test scores, right? I'm comparing tests of two classes to see if the test is valid or not. Take all the scores of the first class, that's X, all the scores of the second class, that's Y, and I'll compare it on that ungodly equation. And once I compare it on this equation, then I can sit there and I can say, now these two tests are valid or invalid because how they compare to one another. That's formal operations. Now, it doesn't have to be something as complex as mathematics. It can be something as simple as tying a shoe, right? We see, in age 2 to age 7, learning how to tie a shoe, and they can't tie it properly. And eventually they practice and practice and practice until it becomes concrete. And all of a sudden, this is how you tie a shoe, and that's it. And by age 7, they're tying their shoes. By age 12, they're taking that concept and they're saying, "Oh, okay, now there's the Scouts, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Cub Scouts, whatever," and they're saying, "Oh, for part of my merit badge, I've got to learn how to tie these knots. How do I tie these knots?" Well, they take the principles they learn in the sensory motor, I'm sorry, in the pre-operational stage from age 2 to 7 to sit there and tie a shoe, and they make these complex knots and sit there and say, "And this is a knot." So that's Piaget. That's how his developmental stuff. Now we come to Lev Vygotsky. So coming down from Piaget, we have Lev Vygotsky that sits there and says, well, we have children in society and they also have a culture that they build. So I'm going to put these two things together. I'm going to call them social cultural theory. So what is this? So in social cultural theory, children are active in their learning, right? Have knowledge, they know it's on, all right? They're already past the age of understanding, age 7, so they know things, right? And they learned it from society, from their moms, from their dads, from their teachers, from their boyfriends, their girlfriends, the people around them, the pastors, whoever. They learned it. Social constructs, right? Now they place a value on these things that they've learned. And they take a look at society and culture and they learn to differentiate what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong, what they like, what they don't like. And again, we see this played out in politics, right? Democrats and the Republicans. Democrats believe in one thing, Republicans believe in another thing altogether. Which one is right? Well, they're both right, they're both wrong. But you still have two groups of people that will swear by their politics. Well, it's a value that they place on it, and they'll have followers that will place the value on their belief system, cultural values. It happens in religion. You have these diverse religions: Catholic, Episcopalian, Lutheran, Methodist. Right? So they're all of the faith, Jewish, right? They're all of the faith. They're all, there, but each one of them has a different value system and it's based on their cultural belief. This is how I believe that God is. This is what I believe the sacraments are. Uh, Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is not the Son of God. He's just another prophet. But yet, you believe these things. System that Vygotsky said, okay, these are cultural values, and this is what we believe. Customs dictate what is important to learn as well. So society puts it out there. The customs of the group that we deal with, what the society believes, what this group of people believes, is what we believe. Custom dictates what we learn. Now, here's something important that you also look at. Um, I'm Italian. I'm also American. You may be Asian, also American. You may be Hispanic, period. And then you may be an illegal alien. I don't know. Whatever you are, think of your culture. Right? Think of what you are. Now, think of the celebrations that your culture has. Okay, think of the ways that you celebrate things. I remember growing up. I went over to my uncle's house for a family gathering, and we went to one of my uncle's backyards. The entire family was there, and they had this huge pig on a spit, out in the backyard. They had coals, and the thing was cooking on the spit. And there it was, and that was dinner. And they would come over and cut the carcass up, and we would eat it and all that stuff. And we would sing and we would dance, Italian songs and have a great time. Right. And whenever people would come together, if you've ever been in family, everybody's talking at once. Having libations and food and laughing and talking in Italian and gesticulating and everything else in creation. And everybody knows what everybody else is saying. Right. You go to another culture, and you may see similarities, but big differences. Maybe the things that they eat, things that they drink. Right. The ways that New Year's are celebrated, it's different. Chinese New Year's, beautiful. Look at the way they do things, with Chinese New Year's. I remember, in Philadelphia, watching the Chinese New Year's parade with all those beautiful dragons and the beautiful colors and fireworks and everything else. Oh my God, just breathtaking, just gorgeous. They would eat, buddy. That was wonderful. Our customs dictate what is important for us to learn. And then we take those customs with us as we grow. So children learn, from what they see. Now, as we're learning, as children are learning, sometimes we have a hard time learning things. Right? Even as adults, we have a hard time learning things. So what do we do? At InterCoast College, we have this thing called academic mentors. Right? So a mentor is somebody that if professor doesn't get through to the student, then they can call the mentor up and sit there and say, Dr. Scuderi, Dr. Tony told me this and this and this. And I kind of got it, but I really don't get it. And somehow he's just not making sense. Could you help me? And the mentor says, oh, yeah, this is what it's like, da, 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 and explains it to the person. The person says, now I got it. Thanks a lot. Okay. So they learn from each other. They learn from each other, right? So they're learning from an expert. They learn from somebody that knows something better than them, more than them. This is a good thing because what happens is the child at this age is learning not only how to accommodate and how to learn, but also humility. They are learning humility that they don't know everything and they need to go to somebody that knows more than they do to learn something. They go to more expert members in society. And we do that, right? We go to an accountant for our taxes. We go to a lawyer if we need criminal proceedings. You come to school to a professor, things of that nature. So Vygotsky looked at all this stuff. And as he was looking at all this stuff, he called this something called the zone of proximal development. Time and space where we learn things from each other is a zone. If you're an artist and you paint or you sketch, you can't do it all the time. There comes this time where you can just sit down, no distractions, and do your craft, right? And we call it what? Being in the zone, right? So that's your zone of proximal development. So it's an approximation. It's there. It's within that zone. It's within that area. And during this time, your proximal development time, this is the time where you have full attention right there, and you can learn the stuff from other people, right? And it's going in, you're learning it, you're able to repeat it, you're able to teach it, you're able to do it. In medical school, the way that they do it is you see one, you do one, you teach one. You're learning how to be a surgeon, you observe a surgery, You have somebody observe you doing the surgery, and then you teach somebody to do a surgery, right? See one, do one, teach one. I teach the same way when I'm teaching counseling and psychotherapy, right? I will be the psychotherapist first, and I'll have one of the students be the patient, and I will show you a different technique. Maybe I'll do Rogerian, maybe I'll do Gestalt, maybe I'll do psychoanalysis, whatever. I will show you one based on what your theoretical basis is. And then I want to see you do one. So I may be the patient, or I may have somebody else be the patient, and I'll observe, and I'll see you do one. Then once I think you've got it, then I want you to teach the class your technique. Well, eventually, guess what? You got it and you become the expert, right? And we do this academically as we latch onto our what do you call our vocations. So we go through academics, and this is how we learn things. So it's our zone of proximal development. This is where learning occurs. But he went a step further when he dealt with children. It says children learn in the zone of proximal development, but how do they learn difficult things? Well, they learn by doing, by doing. So in this zone of proximal development, I'm going to pair you up, again, going way back to behavioral, right? I'm going to pair you up with somebody that knows more than you, and I'm going to show you, or they're going to show you how to do it, and then they want to watch you do it, right? And then you're going to build upon that learning to the point, we're going to do this slowly, and we're going to build upon that learning until you can do it yourself. Okay? And this is called scaffolding. Scaffolds that you see, that's exactly where he got it from. Scaffolding, building upon something else until you are able to reach the top. So, if I want to teach a kid how to do the laundry, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to do forward conditioning, or I'm going to do backwards conditioning. Part of Vygotsky. Forward conditioning through scaffolding, I'm going to sit there and I'm going to say, here are the clothes. Clothes go in the hamper. Dirty clothes in the hamper. All right? So put the clothes in the hamper. So they put the clothes in the hamper. As they put the clothes in the hamper, I'm now going to say, now pick the hamper up and take it to the washer. They're going to pick the hamper up and they're going to put the hamper in the washer, or by the washer. And then I'm going to say, now take the clothes and put them in the washer. And then they're going to take the clothes, they're going to put them in the washer. And then I want to say, now go up here, open up the door, take out the soap, and put the soap pod into the washer. Take the soap pod, put it in the washer. And then I'm going to say, now close the top. I'm going to close the top. I'm going to say, now what I want you to do is turn the dial to large load, large load. Turn this dial here to full wash. Turn it to full wash. Turn this to hot water. You're going to turn the dial to hot water. I'm going to say, now push this button over here and start to close. And you push the button. Each step along the way. Then I take the kid back and I sit there and I say, now what's the first thing you do? And then they'll say, put the clothes in the laundry bin. Put the clothes in the laundry bin. And it progresses from there. That's called scaffolding. You learn how to do things in small stages until you reach the called forward conditioning. Backward conditioning is basically makes little sense because now you say, I want to teach you how to do the laundry. Take the stuff out of the washer, put it in the basket, shut all the dials off, put it in the basket, take the basket, put it back into the room, and take all the clothes out, put them on the floor. Wash the clothes. That doesn't make sense. So, but backward conditioning does work in certain instances. You'll learn that in another class, not this one. So for Vygotsky, again, just to take a look at him, knowledge is socially taken care of, socially constructed. We learn with other people, not in isolation, right? The way that we learn things is through cultural values and how customs, how the people around us dictate things to be done, and what is important and what's not important to learn. Children learn from those that are smarter than them, and so do adults. So we learn by people smarter than us, more expert people, right? And then we have a certain area of space that we can learn in, because we can't learn all the time. This is called the zone of proximal development. We can develop our knowledge base and who we are within a certain period of time. And we learn by short little increments of things building upon one another until we master the subject. And that is called scaffolding. And that's what Vygotsky basically believed. Information process theory is another theory. This uses a model of the computer to describe how the brain works, information processing. So this focuses on how information is perceived, right? How we understand the information, how we process the information. How do I know that this is a duck, even though it's just a stuffed toy, right? But as I see a stuffed toy, it looks like a duck. Why does it look like a duck, right? So this is part of information processing. We use a model, right? We have the real thing on the outside. That's our model. And our brain processes anything that looks like that, that's shaped like that, that has this appearance is a duck. And yes, ducks do look like this out in the wild. Green head and all. I've seen them. Okay. That's the information processing. It focuses on how we perceive the information, right? And this deals with our eyes. What are we looking at? What are we seeing? And then as we look at that, how does it get into our brains? And how does the brain function to take something inanimate and make it come to life, come to real? How do I know that Rocco over here, my gorilla, is a gorilla? It looks like a gorilla because I've seen a gorilla in the zoo and on television. And I could sit there and I could say he's a stuffed animal, but Rocco here is a gorilla. Right? I don't know what Gorgo is. I don't know what they call that. So I'm just going to sit there and say, well, it's a little um, uh, critter from Star Wars. Okay, whatever that is, right? Um, but we make these inferences, right? We are able to shape in our minds from what we see on the outside and say this is what this is based on this object, but focuses on how we perceive it and how information is stored in our memory, right? Now, if I never saw a duck, but I saw, let's say, a chicken, and all of a sudden I get this thing, and anything that looks like this, I'm going to sit there and say, this isn't a duck, this is a chicken, right? Because this is what a chicken looks like. I've seen them, right? I mean, it's got little wings, right? It's got feet. Chicken only has 2 feet, right? It's got a little head. Right? If I bend it like that, it looks like a chicken walking. It's a chicken. So I'm processing this little thing because I don't have all of the information, right? Just like a computer. A computer will process something up to a certain point, and then it'll be a short circuit or stop and say, this is what it is. You'll say, no, it's not, because you haven't gone a step further. Well, I've only gone so far in my learning. Anything that looks like this is a chicken. So I need to go a step further. My brain is processing chicken. So now I go out and see something like this flying by, and I'm sitting over there going, like, what in the world is that? And somebody says, it's a duck. Wait a minute. This looks like a duck. You mean this is yeah, that's what it is. Now the process is finished. Now I can differentiate between a duck and a chicken. So we focus on how information is perceived, how information is stored in the memory, so now I won't make the mistake again, you know, and then how memories are pulled back. Let's see, I saw that bird flying in the air and it was making like a quacking sound where the chicken is making a cluck, cluck, cluck sound. So if I see it flying in the air and it looks like this and it's making a quacking sound, oh, that must be a duck. So now I'm going to remember that. So now, even though I don't see this, object permanence, right? Even though I don't see this, but I hear in the sky quack, 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 quack. I'm going to look up and I'm going to look around to see what? Not a chicken flying, a duck flying. And I'm going to say, where's the duck? Oh, there it is. Now, we also use this process to solve problems. Again, let's go back to the basics, right? So here we have our objects. So now I have to process the information. I have to know 1, 2, 3. Know that individually, the basics. I know that this is 1. If I pull something else in there, that's going to be 2. If I pull something else in there, that's 3. And if I bring something else in there, it is 4. And it doesn't matter what the object is, right? I didn't say 4 pens, 4 pencils, 4 mice. I said, I want something, bring me 4 things. One thing, ah, here's one thing, here's 2 things, here's 3 things, and here is the 4th thing. I just brought 4 objects. We learn to process that, and then we take that basic, and then we learn from the experts how to build upon that. So now we can solve for x. Now we can sit there and we can say 2x plus 3y. So what's x and y? Well, x are uh, mauve colored pens. Y are uh, Sharpies. So now we differentiate. The brain differentiates it. So now every time I see a problem in a certain area based on x and y, how many x's and y's are there? Well, I have 2 x's. I have 2 x's and 1 y, right? 2 pens and 1 Sharpie. So this is information processing, and we take this. So now it goes into our minds, and we sit there and we say, now what does this have to do with developmental psychology and how children develop? Well, the children see something on the outside and they start making connections. This is good, this is bad, this is moral, this is immoral, this is a boy, this is a girl, this I like, this I don't like, this is an animal, this is not, this is a car. And they start to do that, and they learn that they each one of these objects outside of them has a different purpose, right? You drive a car, you date a guy or a gal, you write with a pen or a pencil, and you scratch a puppy, right? So we learn this. The information is in there. We see other people doing these things. We process it. We perceive what needs to be done correctly, and therefore we solve problems. So this is why when you see a little puppy, if you're sane, you'll pick the little puppy up and you'll pet the puppy and have the puppy lick you and kiss you, and then you'll kiss the puppy and all that stuff because that's, you see that it needs a little comfort and safety, right? You wouldn't do that with a rattlesnake. Why? Because you learn that if you pick a rattlesnake up, chances are you're going to get tagged and you're going to die. Information processing. So that takes care of that area. Now we move into another thing called systems theory. Systems theory is the belief that development can't be explained by one concept alone. Systems theory takes things and says it's created by a complex, many things within that area, many things within that system. This is my theoretical basis when it comes to doing family therapy and even complex therapies in addictions and in psychotherapy. I'm a systems theorist. I see things not as though you caused your addiction, you caused your problem, but as a complex system. There are many factors that got you to the point from birth where you are right now that got you to use substances in order to cope with reality and to cope with your issues. What are they? It's not just one thing. It's a very complex system that pulls it together. That's basically systems theory. So the forefront in this is Yuri Bronfenbrenner. Bronfenbrenner believed in a system called the ecological systems theory. All right. So he sat down, he thought that the very systems of the environment and the interrelationships among these systems shape a child's development. So all these different things in the environment and how the child interacts with these different systems. How do mom and dad relate to one another when they're in love? How do they relate to one another when they're angry? How do they relate to one another when they make up? Why does a child relate to a teacher different from a mom and a dad? Or why does a child relate differently to a pastor than they do to mom and dad or a teacher or a firefighter or a cop or something like that, a police officer? What is it? All these different varied systems and how they implode the subject and how they interact with that subject. That is where they start to understand how the environment manipulates and starts to shape a child. the child's development and the child's choices. So the environment, as well as what works biologically, thought processes, feelings, emotions, genetics, body type, all of this stuff, reactions, and how they were taught, how the child was taught to deal with certain things, and how to be happy, mad, glad, sad, all of this stuff, all the emotional stuff that influence the child's development, all of this, right, affects the child. The environment affects the child. And the child also, it's not just environment the child also affects the environment as well. So it's a two-way street. So what Bronfenbrenner believed at this point was that the environment influences the child, but the child can, in some way, shape, or form, interact in that environment and manipulate the environment. And as the child manipulates the environment, the child starts to learn what is appropriate, what is inappropriate, and the things that may be inappropriate learns to manipulate things to make them appropriate for them, for that child, or if not, then abandons that and says, no, this isn't what I really want to do. The child also, as looking at the environment, interacts with it and is able to sit there and to say, this is what I need to do. So that's Bronfenbrenner and the ecological systems theory. Let me pause right here, and we will get back with the ecological model in a moment.